The night air rumbled under the pounding of an Apache helicopter's blades as it roared down toward the helipad of the St. George Military Medical Center. The windows shook. Dust drifted from steel frames while searchlights swept the landing pad with a harsh glare. Orderlies burst from the shadows, stretcher ready, their boots striking the concrete. A voice thundered through the chaos. "Incoming wounded. Critical condition, clear the way." The rear hatch opened with a blast of hot air. On the stretcher lay an unmoving man. Sergeant Ryan Cole. His uniform torn, his body shattered, marked by fire and blood. His chest rose in ragged jolts, as if each breath was a fight against death. Metal fragments glinted deep in his flesh. With every jolt, blood seeped through the bandages thrown on during the flight. The medics' shouted numbers were almost lost in the uproar. Pressure dropping, saturation falling, we're losing him. The urgency electrified the entire team. They surged forward, seizing the stretcher with practiced precision and rushing toward the trauma room. Inside the emergency wing, chaos shifted into surgical order. The double doors slammed open. Doctors and nurses swarmed the patient in a furious dance. "Clamp. Prepare blood, room 3, now." Every second mattered. The air vibrated with tension, stretched thin between life and death. At the center of the storm stood Dr. Michael Keaton, Chief of Emergency Surgery. Broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, he commanded respect without speaking. A veteran of hundreds of operations, he was the one who dragged soldiers back from hell. His voice cracked like a whip. "Move aside. He's mine." Keaton examined Cole's mutilated body with a cold, analytical eye. Even for him, this brushed the limits of possibility. Amid the whirlwind of uniforms, scrubs, and motion, a figure moved with an almost unreal quietness. A woman in simple attire, sleeves rolled up, advanced with calm precision. She didn't speak loudly or give orders, but everything about her radiated confidence. She adjusted the oxygen mask, sat in 4-line, checked the monitors before being told. Her movements were sharp, exact, born of field experience, not textbooks. To the others, she was just another nurse, but a young paramedic noticed her. There was an unusual sharpness in her gaze, a military rigor. Before he could think more, Keaton's voice rang out. "Pressure unstable. Prep him for surgery." Nursa Carter was already there, equipment in hand, ahead of the order. Keaton looked up at her, puzzled. He didn't recognize the face. Probably a new hire. "Who's that?" he growled. "Just a nurse, doctor," the resident replied as she stepped back. "I'll handle it." The tone snapped like a slap. But Carter didn't flinch. Her hands stayed steady, her breathing even, unfazed by the brusqueness. She seemed used to that kind of disdain. On the stretcher, Sergeant Cole groaned faintly, his body trembling with pain. The nurse leaned close, her voice low and firm. "Stay with us, Sergeant. Breathe with me. It's not over." Her tone, soft yet commanding, cut through the haze of suffering. Cole's breathing steadied, barely but unmistakably. Keaton noticed, saying nothing. This wasn't the moment to dwell on it. The lights of the Level 1 trauma unit flooded the room with unforgiving brightness. Monitors screamed, blood dripped through lines, sweat-streaked faces. And yet, amid the frenzy, Carter moved like a ghost, calm, methodical, chillingly precise. Keaton watched her. Something was off. She wasn't reacting. She was anticipating. She handed instruments before they were asked for. She countered a drop in pressure before the alarms sounded. She adjusted a line as if she had treated this exact kind of wound before, not in a hospital, but on a battlefield. Impossible to ignore now. "Take him to room 3, Keaton ordered. The stretcher jolted forward, wheels rattling on the linoleum. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, voices fading as the doors slammed shut behind them. Nurse Carter walked beside the gurney, one hand on its rail, her eyes fixed on Sergeant Cole, not on the machines, not on the chaos, but on him. It was not the look of a nurse performing her duty. It was the look of someone who had already fought to keep a man breathing. It was not the look of a nurse. It was the look of a woman who had already walked through hell, who had carried brothers in arms out of the fire, and who had sworn never again to let one of her own die. The others didn't see it yet, but they would soon understand. In the operating room, the air vibrated with urgency. The harsh glare of the neon lights carved sharp shadows across the spotless walls. On the table, Sergeant Ryan Cole lay unconscious, his chest rising faintly with the rhythm of the ventilator. His body told the story of a violent battle. Shrapnel buried deep in his torso, a burn streaking across his shoulder, blood seeping into the surgical drapes of an almost unreal blue. Dr. Michael Keaton snapped on his gloves. Jaw clenched, mind calculating every risk, he examined the wound with icy precision. He had seen critical cases before. But this one held a particular danger. The fragments threatened everything. One wrong move, and it would be over. "Scalpel," he ordered. The instrument was placed in his hand without a word. Around him, the team moved fast, almost mechanically, shaped by years of training. In one corner, Nurse Carter followed every motion, her gaze fixed on the monitors with an almost unsettling calm. Her badge bore only an initial. When the blade cut into the skin, alarms shrieked. Pressure dropping, the resident shouted, panic cracking his voice. "Stabilize him," Keaton commanded. He dug deeper, sweat already purling at his temples. His hands stayed steady, but he knew how thin the line between life and death was. At the far end of the table, Carter adjusted the fore with surgical speed. "Increase fluids, now," she said, firm but unruffled. The young paramedic obeyed before he even realized he had followed her order, not the surgeon's. Keaton shot her a look. "Stay at your station," he snapped. "You're here to assist, not to command." She didn't move. Her eyes remained on the scrolling numbers. "His pressure won't hold," she murmured, "unless you clamp before cutting any deeper." "I know what I'm doing," he replied coldly. She folded her arms, unbothered. "Clamp first, or he dies." Silence stretched across the room. The younger staff held their breath. Keaton clenched his jaw, pride stiff as armor. 30 years I've been doing this," he said sharply. "I don't need a nurse teaching me how to operate." But Carter didn't back down. She repeated, quieter but immovable, "Clamp. Now." The surgeon ignored her. He continued, confident in his technique. The alarms exploded again. The soldier's skin turned gray. His lips darkened. "Damn it," Keaton muttered, frozen over the wound. Panic brushed the edge of his mind. One more cut and the man would be gone. Carter stepped forward, crossing the invisible line of protocol. "You're going too far," she said, calm, firm, leaving no room for argument. She pointed at the exact spot. "Here. Clamp here. Immediately." Her tone wasn't that of a nurse. It was that of a soldier who had held life in her hands in the heart of chaos. Time seemed to freeze. The team hesitated, eyes flicking between the surgeon and the woman in scrubs. The tension was electric. Each second stretched into an eternity. Keaton's pride screamed to push her away, to take back control. But beneath that pride, an unwelcome intuition stirred, a doubt he hated. And that doubt told him she was right. Cole's vitals were collapsing. Without waiting for approval, Carter grabbed a clamp and held it out to him. "Do it. Now." Their eyes met. Hers didn't waver. They commanded. For an instant, the surgeon's hand faltered. Then instinct, or trust, won. He followed her direction. The clamp snapped shut with a sharp click. The bleeding slowed. The pressure rose. Oxygen stabilized. The alarms went silent. A breath of relief rippled through the room. The young doctors stared at one another, stunned. Keaton looked at the monitor, then at his hands, then at Carter. "Lucky break," he muttered. She shook her head. "Not luck. Experience." And she returned to her place, serene, as if nothing had happened. But everyone in the room now knew she was not just a nurse. The operation continued, slower, more tense. Dr. Michael Keaton worked with a new caution, his gaze returning again and again to Nurse Carter, this woman who anticipated each of his moves before he made them. She read the patient as if reading an open book. When Cole's vitals dipped, she sensed the cause before anyone saw it on the screen. When his breathing faltered, she was already adjusting the ventilator before the alarm screamed. She wasn't following the operation, she was guiding it in absolute silence. And the more Dr. Michael Keaton watched this woman, the more a growing unease crept through him. Years of service, decorations, a reputation forged in blood and precision. And yet this nurse moved on an entirely different level. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. His pride still held his tongue. But between two orders, he caught the muffled whispers of the orderlies. "Who is that girl? She knows what to do before anyone else. She doesn't work like the others." Keaton clenched his jaw. He couldn't afford to be distracted. But the truth stood right in front of him. Someone in his own operating room possessed knowledge equal to, perhaps greater than, his own. And that someone wore a simple nurse's uniform, a badge with no rank, and an unshakable calm. Meanwhile, Sergeant Ryan Cole fought in fevered silence, his body waging its own war while around him another battle raged, the battle of pride against truth, of ego against experience. No one dared say it aloud, but everyone knew. The balance of power had shifted. The surgeon was no longer the only master in the room. The trauma ward roared like a war machine. Orders flew. Boots hammered the sterile floor. The staccato beeping of monitors set the rhythm of tension. At the center of the chaos lay Sergeant Cole, his life hanging from a few red and green lines on a screen. Dr. Keaton's voice cut through the noise. "Keep him stable. Prep room 3. His tone was sharp, precise, the tone of a man who had already pulled soldiers back from hell. But amid the frenzy, one presence stood apart. Nurse Carter. She didn't shout. She never panicked. She worked with the serenity of a soldier loading a weapon before battle. Her hands tied 4 lines with calculated speed. Her eyes tracked the numbers as if she felt the changes before the machines registered them. When a nurse handed over the wrong syringe, she intervened without raising her voice. "Not that one. His heart won't handle it. Dopamine first." The man obeyed instantly, and only afterward realized she had corrected a mistake even the attending physician hadn't noticed. Keaton saw it, and it disturbed him deeply. He leaned toward a resident. "Who is this Carter?" "A nurse transferred from another base, doctor. She's been here a few months." Keaton frowned. He had no memory of approving her transfer to his team. And yet she acted as if she had always belonged here. Too sure, too prepared. He pushed the thought aside and refocused on the patient. Blood soaked through the compresses faster than they could be replaced. "We're losing time," he growled. But Carter was already at the head of the gurney, adjusting the oxygen mask. She leaned toward Cole, her voice soft but unyielding. "Stay with us, soldier. You've come too far to stop now." The words barely brushed the air, but the sergeant stirred, his chest rising with a deeper breath. A resident's eyes widened. He reacted. "Coincidence," Keaton snapped. "Focus on the medicine." Carter didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. She simply returned to the 4-line, her gaze fixed on the steady drip. The younger assistants had already noticed. She didn't react, she anticipated. And her mere presence seemed to steady the tension, as if somehow she already knew how this battle would end. It was then that Keaton snapped. As she reached for another syringe, he stepped in front of her, stopping her with a sharp gesture. His eyes narrowed behind the mask. "Step back. You're just a nurse. Don't overstep your role." Silence fell instantly. Footsteps, clattering instruments, everything hung suspended. Carter froze, her hands still hovering over the tray. For a moment, she seemed about to respond. Then she simply nodded and stepped back, expressionless. Kit Tun turned to his team. No interference. I'm in charge. His voice cracked like a military order, but behind him, doubts were spreading. The young doctors had seen. They had seen how she predicted drops in blood pressure before the alarms, how she prevented fatal mistakes, how her voice had pulled a soldier back from the brink of death. Just a nurse, one of them murmured. Not like the one we know, the other replied. Carter walked silently beside the gurney, one hand resting on its edge, her gaze fixed on Cole's face. She didn't glance at Kit Tun even once. She didn't need to. She had been sidelined before, underestimated before. Nothing new. All that mattered was the man still fighting to breathe. The hallway vibrated with the rumble of wheels and the echo of hurried footsteps. The operating room doors drew closer. Every second felt like an eternity. Inside, Kit Tun was preparing himself mentally. He pictured the wound, the path of the fragments, the invisible map of that shattered chest. Each breath the patient took would be a front line. He was damn good, one of the best. But Sergeant Cole's injuries were a deadly puzzle. One misstep could end everything. Still, Dr. Michel Kit Tun let nothing show. He had built his career on absolute confidence, on the belief that he never shook, never doubted. Yet as the team transferred the soldier onto the operating table, his eyes drifted again toward Nurse Carter. She was already at work, adjusting the monitors before the technician even arrived, fine-tuning the ventilator with an expert gesture. Everything about her radiated mastery, measured, fluid, confident movements. She didn't look like someone waiting for orders. She looked like someone who gave them. Kit Tun clenched his jaw. No, she was just a nurse, and in his operating room, no one would question his authority. The surgical lights flared to full intensity, flooding the room with a harsh, unforgiving whiteness. The team took their positions, the instruments aligned on the steel tray. Kit Tun stepped to the head of the surgical field, projecting the natural command of a battlefield leader. In a corner, silent and still, Carter observed, pushed aside, ignored maybe, but never submissive. She knew something Kit Tun did not. This would not be her first battlefield tonight. And before dawn, he would learn who she really was. The air in the operating room was stifling. The lights, harsher than those of an interrogation room, revealed every bead of sweat, every tremor beneath the latex gloves. Machines beeped, alarms screamed, and the steady breath of the ventilator marked one man's fragile struggle against death. Sergeant Ryan Cole arched on the table, his chest strapped down. Numbers on the screens flashed red, blood pressure crashing. The anesthesiologist shouted something. Kit Tun froze, the scalpel suspended above the wound. For the first time in years, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The surgeon they called when all hope seemed lost was losing his footing. Bring the crash cart, he ordered, his firm voice betraying a crack. Then Carter stepped forward. Her voice cut clean through the turmoil. That incision will kill him. Clamp first. Reposition. Not a suggestion, not advice, an order. Kit Tun turned furious eyes on her. You do not give orders in my operating room. His voice cracked like a whip, silencing the room. You are a nurse, nothing more. Stay in your place. Everything stopped. Interns froze, orderlies hesitated, even the alarms seemed to hold their breath. The storm was ready to break, pride against precision. But Carter didn't flinch. Her gaze steady, unshaken. Her voice calm. If you cut there, he'll bleed out in 10 seconds. Clamp here, then continue. She pointed at a spot with a calm, assured finger. Her serenity in the face of his anger almost disarmed him. Kit Tun seethed. 30 years of career, medals, honors, and now a nurse dared to challenge his decision in front of his entire team. His jaw tightened to the point of pain. He won't survive your hesitation, she pressed, her voice barely rising above the alarms. You know it. You feel it. You see it. On the table, Cole's body convulsed. The monitors screamed. The heartbeat trace flattened. VFib, the anesthesiologist cried. We're losing him. Chaos erupted. An intern grabbed the defibrillator paddles. Another prepared injections. The room became a storm of shouts and frantic movements. And in the middle of that storm, Carter did not move. Her eyes stayed locked on Kitten's. Clamp. Now. Time seemed to split in two. Kit Tun felt the weight of the choice pulling at him: cling to his pride and lose the man on the table, or yield, trust the one who saw what he didn't. His heart pounded in his chest. His mind resisted, but his instincts knew. With a rough growl, he dropped the scalpel and grabbed the clamp. His hands worked with restrained fury, placing it exactly where she had indicated. A click. The bleeding stopped cleanly. The alarms kept shrieking, then died down one by one. The heart trace slowly rose again, like a breath returning to life. Blood pressure climbed. Sergeant Cole was back in the fight. The silence that followed was deafening. Every gaze flicked from the monitors to the two of them. A wave of relief swept through the room. Vitals stable, the anesthesiologist breathed, voice trembling. One intern murmured, "My God." And everyone knew what had just happened. It wasn't the surgeon who had saved the man. It was the nurse. Behind his mask, Kit Tun felt heat rise to his cheeks. Every breath weighed on him like a defeat. All his authority, all his pride, shaken. "Lucky break," he muttered. Carter didn't even look up. She adjusted the four, her hand steady, her face impassive. "Not luck," she said softly. "Experience." And without another word, she returned to her place, calm, composed, as if nothing had happened. But in the tense quiet of the room, everyone knew she had just changed the game. Her words hung in the air like a verdict. No one dared speak. Glances exchanged above masks carried the same thought. This nurse was not what she seemed. The operation continued. Dr. Michael Kit Tun picked up the thread, his hand sure once more, but his mind in complete disorder. She had been right. Not by chance. Not by luck. She knew. The way she had spoken, pointing out the exact spot without hesitation, that wasn't the voice of a nurse trained from manuals. It was someone who had done it before. Someone who had been there. He risked a furtive glance. Nurse Carter stood there, serene, her eyes moving between the monitors and the wound, always a second ahead of the rest of the team. Every gesture, every adjustment seemed anticipated before the need even appeared. She wasn't working like an assistant, she worked like a second surgeon. Or perhaps something more. Behind the masks, whispers began to slip out, barely audible. She knew before he did. "She's not just a nurse, I swear she's done this." Those murmurs scraped against Kitten's pride, gnawing at his authority. He wanted to shout at them, reassert his place, but deep down he knew. They were right. Tonight, a line had been crossed, not just for Sergeant Cole, balanced between heartbeats, but for Dr. Kit Tun himself. For the first time in his career, he had been forced to surrender control, and not to a superior, not to another surgeon, but to a woman everyone assumed was just a nurse. And as he continued the sutures, hands covered in blood and sweat, one question spun endlessly in his mind. Who the hell is she? The room was steeped in an almost sacred silence, the kind that follows chaos. The monitors had returned to their steady rhythm, the green lines drawing a fragile promise of survival. On the table, Ryan Cole lay still, his chest rising with the ventilator's breath. The worst seemed past, but the tension remained thick, vibrating. Kit Tun finished the last stitch. His hands were steady, but his mind wavered. Sweat beaded beneath his cap. Years of service, of emergencies, of battles between life and death, nothing had shaken him like tonight. Not fear of blood, not fear of failure. Her. Carter moved quietly, checking 4 lines, readjusting doses, preparing medications without being asked. She wasn't shaken. She looked exactly as she had at the start, calm, centered, solid, and somehow that unsettled him more than anything else. He tied off the final suture, then finally lifted his eyes toward her. She wasn't looking at him. She sought neither approval nor recognition. She watched the patient, already focused on what came next, as if this operation had been only one episode in a long war she knew far too well. "Vitals stable," the anesthesiologist announced with a sigh of relief. "He's holding on." A collective breath swept through the room. Interns let their shoulders drop. Orderlies exchanged exhausted glances. But no one spoke to Carter. No one thanked her. He knew everything she had done, and none of them knew how to name it. Then a sound cut through the silence. It wasn't a beep or a mechanical breath. It was human, weak, rasping, real. Sergeant Cole groaned. Every head turned. His eyelids trembled under the harsh light. His throat tightened around the breathing tube, letting out a muffled murmur. "Easy," the anesthesiologist whispered while adjusting the doses. "Don't force it." But Cole wasn't trying to fight. He was trying to speak. His cracked lips moved. His broken voice rose barely above the hum of the machines, almost swallowed by them. "Carter." The name drifted through the room like a haze. "Ah." Carter froze, then stepped closer, placing a gloved hand on the patient's shoulder. "I'm here," she murmured. The soldier stirred faintly. His slowing breath scraped each word out of the pain. "You have no idea who she is." The words struck Kiton like a blow to the chest. His heart clenched. He looked from the patient to the nurse, unable to form a single response. "Cole, stop." His chest shook with the effort. The anesthesiologist stepped forward to calm him, but Carter raised her hand. A single gesture, firm, authoritative. "Let him speak." Her voice held nothing pleading. It was the voice of someone accustomed to command. And the anesthesiologist obeyed without a word. The sergeant's gaze locked onto Kiton. His eyes, clouded with pain, still burned with a fierce intensity. "You don't know who she is," he said in a hoarse voice. "She's far more than you think. I'm only breathing because of her." The words fell like thunder in the sterile room. Kiton felt his throat tighten. His pride screamed at him to reject those words, to chalk them up to a fevered delirium. But the conviction in the soldier's broken voice cut through all his defenses. He tried to speak, to ask, to understand. But no sound came out. Carter said nothing either. Her face remained impassive. She didn't savor the recognition. She didn't seek an explanation. She simply placed her hand on the soldier's arm. "Rest," she said softly. "You'll need it." But it was too late. The silence that followed carried a silent revelation. The interns exchanged stunned looks. The orderlies remained motionless. Even the usually impassive anesthesiologist seemed shaken. And they all knew they had just heard something extraordinary. An elite soldier, one of the best in the country, had spoken this woman's name with a devotion no hierarchy could explain. Not as a nurse, not as an assistant, but as someone greater, someone essential. Michael Kitton's fingers tightened at his sides. His mind spun, searching for a rational explanation. Was she a decorated former combat medic? A specialist working undercover? And above all, why had no one warned him? But the real question, the one gnawing deepest, was simpler. Why hadn't he seen it before? The sergeant's words looped through his head. "You have no idea who she is." The operation ended in heavy silence. No one spoke, no one asked a single question. The weight of that sentence hung over them, heavier than blood, heavier than death. When the patient was finally stable, Kiton stepped back, ripping off his gloves in a sharp motion. His hands stayed steady, but his heart raced. He cast one last glance at Carter. She didn't look up. She was already dictating vitals, giving instructions, coordinating the patient's transfer with an almost ordinary calm, if one ignored the shadow of what they had all just heard. Kiton left the room, but the sentence followed him, wedged into the hum of the neon lights, into the sterile emptiness of the hallway. "You have no idea who she is." And for the first time in his career, Dr. Michael Kiton felt a new kind of fear, the fear of no longer being the most competent, the most perceptive, or even the most experienced person in his own operating room. The night had transformed the hospital. Daytime tumult had faded into an artificial calm. The whisper of ventilation, the dull drone of fluorescent lamps, and now and then the squeak of a shoe on polished tile. Kit Tun walked slowly through the empty corridor. His thoughts circled endlessly, replaying every second of the operation. He had lived through hundreds of them, brushed death countless times, but this one clung to him differently. Not because of the blood or the danger, because of her. You have no idea who she is. The soldier's words echoed in his skull. The more he searched for answers, the more the questions multiplied. Who was Nurse Carter, really? How could she know without hesitation exactly what needed to be done? Why had the sergeant spoken her name with such reverence? Without realizing it, he had stopped in front of the recovery room. Through the glass, he saw Ryan Cole lying under the sheets, his arms threaded with cables, the machines emitting a steady, soothing beep. And seated beside him was Carter. She wasn't taking notes, wasn't touching the equipment. She was simply there. Silent, still, the posture of a guardian, not a nurse. Kit Tun stood for a moment in the doorway. His pride urged him to leave, to turn around. But something else, stronger, more visceral, drew him inside. He pushed the door open. The air smelled of antiseptic and iron, as if a piece of the battlefield had slipped in. Carter briefly lifted her eyes, gave him a nod, then returned her attention to the patient. She didn't ask why he had come. She offered no explanation. Kit Tun cleared his throat, his voice low. You saved him. She didn't look away from the bed. We saved him. Her words were measured, polite. But he heard the nuance. She was deflecting. He took a step toward her. Don't take me for a fool. You knew things no one here could know, did things no nursing school teaches. You didn't help me. You directed me. Her gaze finally met his. Calm. Steady. Would you have preferred I stayed silent? The question pierced him. His mouth opened, then closed again. She was right. His pride had nearly cost a life. He exhaled slowly, almost defeated. Who are you? For the first time, her face relaxed slightly. A shadow crossed her eyes, something deeper than fatigue. She leaned back against the chair, arms crossed. You don't want to know the answer. His chest tightened. Try me. Before she could reply, Sergeant Cole stirred. His eyelids fluttered weakly. A rasped groan escaped his throat. Carter was at his side instantly, her hand on his forearm. Easy. You're safe. A faint smile brushed the soldier's lips. His eyes, still clouded, searched for Kit Tun. She always ends up getting there, he murmured. What does that mean? Kit Tun asked, leaning closer, but the sergeant coughed violently, his body shaking with spasms. The doctor moved to intervene, but Carter raised her hand, a sharp, authoritative gesture. Not now. He needs rest. Her tone left no room for discussion. Kit Tun felt frustration rise, not because she opposed him, but because she was right again. The minutes stretched on. The patient sank back into heavy sleep. Silence followed with him. Kit Tun broke it, speaking softly. You've been in the field. Carter didn't answer. Her jaw tightened slightly. Her eyes glimmered with a strange light, pain, memory, perhaps both. Not all wounds bleed on the outside, doctor. Her response fell simple and opaque, like a stone sinking into water. Kit Tun studied her for a long time, searching her features for fragments of a truth she refused to give. And the more he looked, the more he understood. She wasn't an ordinary nurse. She was someone who had saved lives under fire. Someone who knew what it meant to lose, and to never get used to it. The precision of her movements, the certainty in her voice, the way Sergeant Cole trusted her without hesitation. She hadn't just seen combat, she'd lived it. Led it. Kit Tun stepped closer, his voice lower, almost a whisper. You were one of them, weren't you? Special operations. Carter's silence said more than any answer could. A tension settled between them, thin as a blade. Then she finally spoke, her voice calm but hardened with steel. Titles don't matter. Neither do ranks. What matters is that he's still alive tonight. But Kit Tun couldn't stop there. His pride demanded understanding. His curiosity demanded to know why she was here, why hide all that behind a coat and a badge. Someone like her doesn't just disappear in hospital corridors. For the first time, her mask cracked. She finally lifted her eyes toward him, and in that look he saw something other than quiet strength, a burden. Because sometimes saving a single life in silence is worth more than all the medals. Because some wars don't end with the last gunshot. Her words chilled him. There was a story beneath them, a story she had no intention of telling. He wanted to insist, to push further, but the way she looked at him, calm, firm, final, told him he would get nothing more. Silence settled again, thick as fog, broken only by the steady breathing of the machines. Kit Tun turned away, ready to leave, but before he reached the door, a weak voice stopped him. Sergeant Cole was stirring on the bed, his eyes half open. Dr. Kit Tun. The surgeon turned. The soldier's pupils locked onto his with an almost supernatural intensity. If you still doubt her, you'll regret it. His head fell back onto the pillow, swallowed by sedation. The words hung suspended in Kitten's chest, burning, indelible. He left the room, heart racing, mind in turmoil. Reason told him to reject all of it, to focus on medicine, on facts, but an older, more instinctive intuition whispered that the truth stretched far beyond the walls of this hospital. And for the first time, Michael Kit Tun understood that the war hadn't stayed on the front. It was still alive here, in these silent hallways, hidden behind a nurse's badge. Carter wasn't simply a nurse. She never had been. And Kit Tun wasn't sure he was ready to learn the rest. Gray dawn seeped through the windows of St. George Military Medical Center, washing the corridors in a dull light. The chaos of the night had faded, but its echoes lingered everywhere, in murmurs, in glances, in hesitant movements. Everyone who had been in the operating room carried that night on their shoulders. And already, rumors spread through break rooms over cups of coffee, in the halls between shifts. They said, she knew what to do before he did. She's the one who saved him when Kit Tun hesitated. She's not just a nurse. The words spread like wildfire, even if no one dared confront her directly. No one except him. Kit Tun hadn't slept. The sergeant's phrases echoed in his head, scraping at his pride, stoking his curiosity. He paced in the staff room, staring into a cold cup of coffee. He told himself he wanted answers for protocol, for hierarchy, for clarity. But he knew the truth. He wanted answers for himself. Who is she? When he finally left the room, he didn't head toward his office. He walked straight to the recovery room. Sergeant Cole was asleep, his steady breathing blending with the soft beeping of the machines. At his bedside, still, Carter. She didn't seem to have moved all night. Same posture, same calm, same vigilance. You haven't left his room, Kit Tun observed quietly. She didn't lift her eyes. He's not out of danger yet. He stepped closer, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The whole hospital is talking about you. This time, she turned her head. Her expression remained impassive. Let them talk. You're not going to deny it. Deny what? That you're far more than what your badge says. Her silence was more telling than any answer. Before he could press further, the door opened. Two men in dark suits entered. Their presence alone lowered the temperature of the room. Not medical staff, military. Agents. Their movements were precise, their authority silent. Their identification cards flashed briefly before disappearing. Dr. Kit Tun, one said curtly. Yes? A word, please. The surgeon stiffened. If this is about the patient, It's not about him, the man cut in. His gaze slid toward Carter, then back to Kit Tun. Outside, please. A tense silence. Kit Tun hesitated, casting one last glance at Carter. She didn't move, but he saw the faintest tightening of her jaw. In the hallway, the taller of the two men lowered his voice. "You operated on a classified agent last night. His identity, as well as the circumstances of his injuries, is restricted to authorized channels." "I know confidentiality protocols," Kit Tun replied, irritated. "But this isn't about him, it's about her." He pointed sharply toward the door. "That nurse, she gave orders in my operating room. She knew things she couldn't possibly know. And that soldier, your soldier, treated her like a superior." The two men exchanged a subtle but heavy look. Kit Tun noticed instantly. "You don't need to worry about Nurse Carter," said the shorter one in a flat tone. "She is exactly where she's supposed to be." "That's not an answer," Kit Tun snapped. "I nearly lost a man because I hesitated." "She didn't, she knew exactly what to do." "I have the right to know why." The taller agent leaned in slightly, his voice lower, more dangerous. "Dr. Kit Tun, listen carefully. What you deserve, doctor," he said in a cold voice, "is to keep doing your job, patch up the people we bring you, and leave the rest alone." Kit Tun clenched his fists. "You're asking me to ignore the fact that I was overridden in my own operating room." The shorter agent held his gaze. "She didn't override you, doctor. She saved him. You should be thanking her, not questioning her." The words hit harder than he wanted to admit. Harsh, final, yet carrying something else. A half-hidden respect. Kit Tun felt his heartbeat quicken. "She's one of you, isn't she?" No answer, but their silence was enough. Before he could push further, the door opened. Carter stood there, straight, unshakable, her eyes hard as glass. "If you're finished, my patient needs calm." The two men straightened instantly, and for the first time their stone faces cracked. They stepped aside, letting her pass. Not out of politeness, out of respect. The kind given by hardened men to a superior. And the revelation hit him full force. Carter wasn't just part of their world, she commanded it. Back in the room, the air felt heavier. Kit Tun stood there, uneasy, mind in disarray. On the bed, Sergeant Cole stirred weakly, his eyes half opening. A faint, genuine smile touched his lips. "Has she told you yet?" he murmured, voice rasping. Kit Tun stepped closer. "Told me what?" The soldier's smile widened despite the pain bending him. "That she trained us." His eyes closed again as he slipped back into sleep. The words detonated in the surgeon's mind. Trained us. Not helped, not treated, trained. The best soldiers in the world. Trained by the woman everyone assumed was just a nurse. Kit Tun stepped back, dizzy. His breath came short. The puzzle was finally coming together, and the picture it formed overwhelmed him. Carter wasn't merely from that world, she had built it. And Michael Kit Tun understood she had never left the battlefield. She walked these hospital corridors in blue scrubs, hidden behind a title far too small for her. The mask was beginning to fall, and there would be no going back. The sun had set when Kit Tun returned to the recovery room. The hallways were bathed in the pale hum of neon lights. The day shift was gone, replaced by the quieter, sharper night staff, but the whispers persisted. Snatches of sentences followed him everywhere. She trained us. Those 3 words had haunted him all day. He had turned them over again and again, each time discovering a new meaning, the agent's silence, the respect in their stance, and the way Carter carried herself. Not like a subordinate, but like someone who knew the weight of authority and death. She wasn't part of their world. She embodied it. He pushed the door open without a sound. Sergeant Cole was awake this time, his face pale, his eyes clear. Carter was still there, a steadfast sentinel in her scrubs, watching without rest. "How is he?" Kit Tun asked, his voice softened. "Alive for now," she replied without looking up. The soldier managed a tired smile. "Thanks to her," he breathed. Kit Tun folded his arms. "Yes, I've been hearing that since last night." His gaze fixed on Carter. "But what I still haven't heard is the truth." For the first time, she sighed. Her shoulders sagged just barely. "Doctor, No," he cut her off, louder than he intended. "Not this time. You're not slipping away from this. I nearly lost a man in my own oar. I've done this job for 30 years, and you, hidden behind a simple badge, knew exactly what to do when I doubted. And now I find out you train men like him." He nodded toward the soldier. "You owe me an explanation." The silence that followed seemed to swallow the air itself. Only the monitors continued to beat their steady rhythm. Finally, Carter lifted her eyes to him. Her gaze pierced straight through him. Calm. Sharp. "You think you want the truth," she said slowly. "But the truth has a price." The sergeant shifted, drawing their attention. "He deserves to know," he said in a rough voice. "If he's going to keep saving us, he needs to know who stands at his side." She looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to Kit Tun. "You want the truth, Doctor? Fine. But it doesn't leave this room." Kit Tun nodded, his throat tight. She leaned back against the wall, hands clasped, her voice steady, almost clinical, but every word carried the weight of a lifetime. "I wasn't always a nurse. Before that, I was part of a program that doesn't officially exist. We trained operators for missions no one will ever talk about. We taught them how to practice medicine when no surgeon was within 100 kilometers, how to stop a hemorrhage in the mud, how to pull shrapnel out of their brothers while under enemy fire." She paused, then continued more quietly. "I didn't just assist them. I commanded them. And sometimes, I brought them home." The words fell like lead. Kit Tun felt his breath catch. The pieces finally clicked together with brutal clarity, the precision of her orders, her calm in the heart of chaos, the respect in the soldier's eyes. She wasn't guessing. She was remembering. Sergeant Cole managed a faint smile, his eyelids half closed. "They used to call her the Red Angel," he murmured. "She showed up in hell when you thought it was over. She taught us everything. Field medicine, survival. And how to keep fighting when everything seemed lost. Men like me are still breathing because of her." A shiver ran through Kit Tun. The Red Angel. He had heard that name once, in half-smothered field rumors buried under military secrecy, but he had never believed she was real. And now she stood before him, alive, flesh and blood, hidden under a hospital scrub top. Rumors, whispers in medical and military circles, notes half erased from reports that were never published. They spoke of a legend, a battlefield ghost, a nurse who appeared when all hope was gone, who tore the dying away from death where even surgeons no longer dared to try. Nobody really believed it. A fable, they said. And yet she was sitting right there. For the first time, Carter's eyes softened. "That was another life," she murmured. "I buried it when I came here. This hospital is the only place where I can save lives without having to bury the dead afterward. That's all I ever wanted." Silence stretched. Kit Tun felt his pride slowly melt. A whole career spent demanding respect, building a name, proving he was the best, and in front of him stood a woman who had given everything, who had redefined the word survive, and who had asked for nothing in return. No medals, no recognition, not even the truth. He sat across from her, his voice lower than he intended. "Why hide it? Why let people believe you're just a nurse?" Carter gave a faint smile. "Because being just a nurse still lets me save them. No politics, no orders, just lives to protect here. I don't need to be the Red Angel. I can simply be Carter." On the bed, Ryan Cole let out a pained, muffled laugh. "Call her whatever you want, Doctor, but when the next war crashes through the doors of your oar, you'll be glad she's here." Calm settled again. A heavy calm, full of respect. Kit Tun remained seated, feeling the revelation press on his chest. His pride was gone, replaced by something rarer, humility and admiration. He looked at her truly for the first time, not as a nurse, not as a subordinate, but as the silent warrior she was. "You saved him," he said softly. "And you saved me too, from myself." Carter didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her eyes were already back on the patient, attentive, focused, as if somewhere behind these immaculate walls, the battlefield had never stopped existing. And for the first time, Michael Kitton finally understood the whisper that had haunted him from the beginning. You have no idea who she is. Now, he did. And he knew he would never forget it.